G'day, guys. You're welcome to My Drunk Philosophy. I'm Nathan Gooks Fletcher. Today I'm going to talk about why we have so much division in the world. In fact, why we've had so much division in the world, seemingly, over the entirety of recorded history. Now, I know this is a big call, and this is only one cause that I've been thinking about. So, let's wind the clock back to when mankind was living in tribes. Now, I know that there's groups such as the Native American Indians and, of course, the Aborigines that until recent history, yes, with the advent of Europeans coming in, and you can call it an invasion, you can call it a colonization, whichever you want. I'm not going to enter, this is not about politics here. But people who lived in tribes, we all did at one point. Every single one of us has got a tribal relative somewhere in the history of our species. Those tribes were largely 20, 30, maybe on the outside 50 individuals. And there's a reason for that, because if you get too many people together, they disagree. Because people have got different ideas of how things should be done. And yes, different people with different skin colours was a thing. You could call it proto-racism if you want, but tribes were very much, we are here, this is us, this is what we do, you are there, and that's what you do. Funnily enough, like most other primates, like monkeys or chimpanzee, they live in what you could consider a tribal group. Okay? There's a certain group of monkeys, let's say 50 monkeys or 50 chimpanzee, and they all live together. Familial friends, however you want to see it, led by the prime ape, if you will. Yes, it's a terrible, terrible joke. Double entendre attempt with Pokemon. Still, prime ape, if you will. And we are closely related to, especially the chimpanzee. So we lived in these tribes, these groups. Once again, 30 to 50 individuals. Then civilization came along, and that started, well, you could argue what started civilization, whether it was religion or agriculture, but people started living in larger groups. 100 people. Yeah, debates started raging. People had different ideas of how things should be run and what should be done. Who's going to lead? Who's going to do this? Who's going to, there was problems that needed to be sorted out and ironed out. And would have been social contracts and agreements. And then they got bigger and bigger until we ended up with city-states, civilization. Then we needed laws. Now, one of the things that a law provides is expected behavior. Okay? Saying, if you do this, murder, you're a bad person. We don't want you in our society. Okay? If you commit rape, we don't like you and we don't want you in our society. And it basically said, look, we all have to try to get along, even though we don't. Once again, human beings came from tribes, 30 to 50 people is about average. And now all of a sudden you've got 3,000 or 4,000. Okay? By the time you get to Rome, you're talking about 200,000 to 300,000 people in that city alone in the 1st century AD. Oh yeah, they had laws. Very tyrannical laws, but they had laws. But they didn't just have laws now about behaviour, laws about how you could trade, what you could do with that trade, all that sort of thing. How to treat your slaves, because yes, of course, slavery was a thing back then, as it always has been. With the Egyptians had slaves as well. There's all these new laws and regulations. Why? Because people, generally speaking, large groups, there's going to be people in there who just don't get along. Once again, we can go for the tribal idea. You get to the modern era, now we're living in cities of millions. Not just cities of 1,000 or 200,000, but millions. Whoa. And people don't get along. And so our laws today are even I wouldn't say more strict, but certainly more involved and more nuanced than they've ever been before. Why? Once again, people don't get along. Different people have different ideas of how to live their lives and how they want others to live their lives as well. Okay? You want to know war? One of the big things about war is you've got a bit of territory. I want that territory for whatever reason. Whether it be the conquistadors looking for vainglory in South America, whether it be the Crusaders looking to free Jerusalem from the Muslims in the 12th century, whether it be Iraq wanting to liberate Kuwait of its oil. It's territory. Well, you couldn't ask for something more tribal or basic or primitive than territory, could you? That's very tribalistic. That's very much animalistic. It's, we want your territory. Please give it to us, or we will beat you over the head for it. Now we've got a new twist, though. You know, it's bad enough that millions live in cities and millions live in these places around the world who want to have beef with one another. Now we've got something called the internet. That's not so bad, except for we have something called social media. Now, if you take this principle along the curve, if, generally speaking, people like a group of 30 to 50 individuals as from family and family friends, or friends of the family, however you want to put it, and it's usually 30 to 50 people in that group, okay? Now you're dealing with billions. Billions, and every single one of us on the internet has a voice. And we all get heard. We've all had people reply to our comments, whether it's positive or negative, right? We still got the same problem. We don't agree with each other. But unlike other places, the rules, because we don't have laws really pertaining to the internet except for in terms of corporate law or business law, we don't actually have laws on the internet that are government sanctioned on the populace using it, because it's very hard to do. It would require international agreement on those laws, and then we'd have to go and fiddle around with those for possibly hundreds of years, because it's a new thing, it's a new medium. But now there's billions of people not agreeing with each other. And there's no standard to the behaviour. There's no, if you do this, if you dox somebody on the internet, we don't like you in our society and go to jail. There's none of that. Now, if you dox somebody, you can be sued, sure, but there's no, I'm going to, you get taken out of society. There's no jail time for that. Why not? Because we, as of yet, haven't worked out, if we've even tried, and I don't think we've even looked at this, the internet does need to be legally, have a legal framework to it. Because for those people, and I'm a libertarian, okay? I want everyone to have as much freedom as we can under the auspices of, we also need laws, because I like my shit and I don't want it stolen. And if it does get stolen, I want to have the police go and find the person who did it and may get in trouble for it. That makes sense, right? And the same thing should be done on the internet. Now, there are laws, sure, but there's no laws on social interaction, because here's the difficulty. I turn to someone and I call them every name under the sun. I'm actually allowed to do that. I can do that legally. If I walk up to somebody in the street and just a string of language in their face, that's fine. I mean, everyone around me is going to say, you're a piece of shit, and possibly people who are already friends say, no, that's too far, Mr. Nathan Googs Fletcher. Sure. But on the internet, I can't walk up to someone and punch them in the head. because you just can't do it. It's not the way the medium works. Whereas, of course, you can do that in real life. You can just walk up to somebody and punch them in the head. Now, if you do that, that's assault. That's battery, right? You get charged for that. That's illegal. You can't just walk up and hit people. So the issue is, freedom of speech is fine, right? Of course it is. I love freedom of speech. I think that everybody should say whatever they want. Now, of course, there's social consequences to that. Absolutely. However, we can't do that I'll use the term, in the real world, and then say, but on the internet, we should. Because that makes no sense, because if we do that, and I think this is where a lot of the conflict and the laws, criminal laws changing, saying, well, you can't call a transgendered person anything that could be considered transphobic, and we should turn that into law. And that's a response to what we're seeing online, okay? Whether you think it's right or wrong, it's a response to that effect. So they're saying, okay, well, if this is happening in the cyber world and it's not good and it's harming people, then if we make a law pertaining to that for the internet, then we have to make a law pertaining to that in real life. And this is where we start going down the tyranny trap. And depending on who you read, mankind tends to head towards tyranny over time anyway, which is why we need to always fight for democracy, because it's actually easier to just let somebody else lead you and not have to worry about voting for them in 3 or 4 years' time. And usually the first tyrant's benevolent, the second tyrant probably not so much. So if you look at it from that perspective, what some of these laws are, and we're seeing in real life that never used to exist before, are purely as a response to how do we legally stop people from destroying each other on the internet, which is a horrible behavior, by the way. And then how do we not have that in reality outside of the internet? We are coming to a point in our society due to social media, and this is not necessarily, I'm not blaming Twitter or Facebook, because yes, they've brought in laws and they've brought in rules over time that for some are draconian, for others are very much, oh, thank God they brought that in, in terms of speech. But they're not doing it for the wider society. And I'm not sure how we as people and as humans are going to be able to actually get to a point where we either say, look, the internet or social media is a separate realm to the real world outside of the internet. And for myself personally, I would prefer that course. At least at this point, we externalize the internet and say there needs to be a set of rules or laws or regulations there on the internet that we can slowly work out the knots and the twists and the turns to as we need to, and as will happen anyway, whilst allowing the real world outside the internet to not change except for what's happening in the real world. This is a very deep and complex problem, and we have not even scratched the surface of this philosophically or psychologically, because there is a lot of argument in psychology of how this is actually working for us in the fields of things like evolutionary psychology. People like Gard Saad are doing a bit of work on this, and it's difficult because it's a completely brand new medium that we've never dealt with before. At this stage, I think that we need to have patience with each other, and we need ourselves to think about what we are doing on social media and how we are using the medium. Why are you using the medium? What's your intention? If your intention is to be entertained, then be entertained. If your intention is to get into a political stoush, learn about the fucking politics you're trying to have a stoush about before you do. So you've got good arguments instead of just getting upset and angry and frustrated because, you know, the other person's come up with a point that you can't argue against, which, by the way, does happen to me at times. I'm not the most intelligent person in the world, neither am I the fount of all knowledge. One of the things about philosophy is asking questions, not necessarily answering them. But this is a question that needs to be answered. How are we going to affect laws on the internet, especially in social media, that will not have massive and terrifying repercussions for free speech in the world outside the internet? Once again, we are Homo sapiens. We have evolved. I shouldn't say designed. God, we have evolved, generally speaking, to know 30 to 50 people. I mean, think about your own life outside of Facebook, where you might have 6 million friends. Look at your own life and actually sit down and figure out how many people in this world are your family, how many are your friends, how many of these people do you actually think you could trust, and to what extent. And you're probably not going to come out with anything past 50. And you'd probably be very lucky to get up to 50 in most cases. That's your tribe. That's your crew. That's your people. So we need to really start thinking about how we're going to utilize social media as a medium and how we're going to utilize the internet. And once again, structure it in such a way that it can have legal boundaries like the real world outside the internet, but at the same time recognizing that the internet is a completely separate world in a sense, well, truthfully, in an existential sense, to the real world we live in every day. I'm Nathan Googs Fletcher. This is my drunk philosophy. If you have any ideas, please jot them down in the down bar, subscribe to my channel, and I'll catch you all later on. Hooroo!